Well, former President Jacob Zuma has demanded that he be acquitted of arms deal corruption without ever facing trial because the state has lost the constitutional legitimacy to prevent the evidence against him. Zuma was responding to arguments by lead prosecutor Billy Downer, who says the former president's efforts to seek acquittal through a so-called special plea process are legally ludicrous. Well, to give us more insight on this, we're joined by legal analyst Benedict Phiri. Mr. Phiri, good evening to you and thanks for your time. I suppose very little surprises in terms of where we are now and what is unfolding in court. In fact, many legal experts, and I believe you're one of them, had called it that this is in fact where the former president was heading.
Yes, I think the moment we knew that there was a special plea coming, which was going to deal with the authority of the prosecutor to prosecute, we knew that linked to that would be a demand for acquittal, because that's what the Criminal Procedure Act allows. But I think what is actually quite obvious in this instance is that the former president is actually putting the NPA on trial again. He's really going to the way that they've conducted themselves in investigating this corruption and how they've actually conducted themselves in prosecuting him, and saying that in those circumstances there's no ways he can be afforded a fair trial, and therefore they shouldn't be seen as having the right or authority to prosecute him.
So what happens now in terms of the hearings that were set to be held on this very matter?
So the judge will have to consider the arguments that have been raised by the former president as well as the prosecution. President Zuma very clearly saying that this is something that must be put to trial. So in other words, we must have a trial within a trial. And the NPA must explain themselves around, what were their motives, Mr. Nguka, Mr. McCarthy, and that should actually be put to a trial adjudication by the judge so as to assess whether, in fact, the NPA should be empowered to continue with this prosecution.
What are the considerations that the judge is going to have to make when deciding whether or not to grant him this request? Because on the one hand, of course, you're looking at further delays in the start of his actual trial, but there's also the matter that he's raising of prejudice. I mean, is it likely that he would be prejudiced in the absence of this trial within a trial, effectively?
I think he is entitled to raise this special plea, just like any accused person. When you plead not guilty to a set of charges, you are entitled to raise a special plea along with that plea. And he's entitled to have it heard by the court. It will most likely, in actual fact, it will lead to delays because there's a number of issues that have to be adjudicated by the judge before we actually even possibly see Mr. Zuma on the stand. And over and above that, it's a novel constitutional question around what is the right to a fair trial in the context of a prosecutor having authority to prosecute. So we're likely to see even that question getting ventilated all the way up to the Constitutional Court as well. So my sense is we're likely to see further delays before Mr. Zuma takes the stand, if at all.
Mr. Phiri, I'm listening to you speak, and I'm just thinking about the merry-go-round that this particular case has been caught up in, and the fact that they're just for different reasons. There's always a reason why, Mr. Zuma cannot have his day in court, at least not in the most literal sense, in terms of answering to the charges that the NPA have brought against him.
That's right, Kathy. But I think we should be fair to the former president. The allegations he makes in respect of the conduct of the NPA are serious. And if he's found to be correct, I don't think we should allow a prosecuting authority to conduct themselves in that manner. So I think we should be fair to him that these are aspects that should be tested and should be put in front of a judge to decide whether they validly go to whether he'll have a fair trial or not.
How far back would this trial within a trial in particular, where the NPA is concerned and some of the interference at the NPA, how far back would that need to go in order for Mr. Zuma to clearly articulate his case? Because we know that the NPA itself has been mired in various and multiple controversies of interference.
I think if you look at Mr. Zuma's case as put in his affidavit, he's saying, you know, as far back as the decision to charge me, the issue was contaminated. There were considerations in respect of the timing of my charges that had nothing to do with the evidence. And if we accept that, then we should actually consider whether, you know, legitimately and from a moral perspective, the NPA has title to charge and prosecute this action. And obviously, the question of title to charge has never been looked at in this context and never been interpreted in this manner. So there'll be quite a lot of thinking for the judges to do in this manner, whichever court it comes to after the court in Pietermaritzburg.
You've raised the matter of the seriousness of the issues that Mr. Zuma is raising. What would the NPA have to do if they were to succeed in refuting them without necessarily having this matter go on trial?
So the NPA, in their answer to the former president's special plea, have basically said that, you know, the question of authority to prosecute is not as wide as the president seeks it to be. And certainly it's unprecedented in the manner that he seeks it to be. So they are going to try and narrow the question of authority to prosecute to effectively a formalistic interpretation. That's really what they're going to try. And then also say that, well, to the extent that there may be issues with prosecutor Billy Downer, the lead prosecutor, it shouldn't taint the prosecution as a whole, and there are other prosecutors that can then step in and be seen to be impartial in leading evidence against the former president.
Legal analyst Benedict Phiri, let's leave it there for tonight. Thank you so much for your time.